Welcome to The Intentional Investor with Matt Zeigler, where he and his guests explore the intersection of investing and life, portfolio and purpose. Nothing in this podcast is investment advice. Nothing in this podcast is advising you to buy or sell any security or to do anything with your money. Seriously, you should only act on investment advice from someone you know and who knows your unique situation. We are not that person. Matt Zeigler is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments, and the opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments or of Second Foundation Partners. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of Sunpoint Investments.
You're watching The Intentional Investor here on the Epsilon Theory YouTube channel. I'm your host, Matt Zeigler, and today, easily, in my top 10 Burrs, he's at the top. I think of him kind of as the Bill Burr of behavioral finance in this plain-spoken truthiness of how things work, but also he's got that hard-scrabbled city kid humor to him. And he's not Aaron Burr, at least without any Hamilton duels that I can report that I know of, but he is a former history major, so I hope he likes that reference, and we're going to talk a lot more about conflict and violence, I feel like, today for some reason. That leads me to how this guest has enough musical chops, as you can see by the guitar in the background there, to have something in common with Clive Burr. And that's the original Iron Maiden drummer, if and you don't know, which even if old Clive didn't make it past the third album, like this guest's music career doesn't even feature his name, Burr, anywhere in the liner notes, which I'm still going to be hunting for. I think he can appreciate the beat, and we have guitars to discuss anyway, because drummers are silly. My guest today, he's got his own eclectic stories that I need to learn more about, from DC punk rock history to the aforementioned history degree of his own studying architecture in Paris, to his behavioral finance related work at Taves, which is spelled Toes, T-O-E-W-S, in the Behavioral Investing Institute in New York City. I'm so excited for this. Kind of the Eddie Bauer of fitted shirts of behavioral superpowers. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to Eben Burr.
Wow. Thank you, Matt. That was fantastic. I loved that.
I will be your hype man if I can play that guitar at some point. How's
you
that?
can play that and any of my other guitars anytime you want. And in fact, for a little bit of history here, the first time we had a conversation, I felt so connected to you that I actually invited you up to my country house, which is where I'm in the attic right now. And that is how immediately connected I felt with you, and that we had so much in common and so much to talk about that I was like, you need to come spend the weekend here. So let's go.
My wife and I are going to book this. We're coming to hang out. And now that I know that you have this guitar, we connected before this recording. I pined for that guitar and I couldn't afford it at one point 20 something years ago. And the fact that it's sitting there is just blowing my mind right now. So, all right, I'm starting us here. This is about you today, sir. I have to read this quote. This is from Ian MacKaye. Don't worry if you don't know who this is, but I believe it was after he saw the Cramps in 1979. And I want to take this back. If you tell me you were at this show, I'm going to secretly hate you even more. So Ian says about going to this show, and this is important because I think this is the stew that Eben Burr emerges from as a child. Every given was really challenged at this gig. At this moment, I realized here was a community that was politically confrontational, that was theologically confrontational, that was artistically confrontational, that was sexually confrontational, physically confrontational, musically confrontational. There was all kinds of craziness. Everything was in the room. I thought, this appeals to me. This is a world I think I can breathe in. This is what I need. You grew up in DC, I want to say just in the 80s. Did you feel this sense of of confrontation as a kid growing up? Was that in the zeitgeist around you?
Absolutely. I mean, DC is an interesting city, and was a more interesting city back then because it was in the wake of the riots in the 60s and the, as they termed it, white flight, that a lot of people with money left the city. And so it was this backdrop of decaying grandeur, which a lot of American cities were back then. But it wasn't an industrial city. Everything focused around the government. So it was a somewhat middle class city. It was a lot of people like my parents who were federal employees who were there just trying to make the country a better place. But then you have the rotation of different governments coming in and out. You've got the disillusion of the youth who are particularly informed about politics because their parents worked in politics.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot to get mad about there as a kid, right? Because as a young person, you are more tuned into the anger and less tuned into the nuance, I think.
What did your parents do? Were they actually in the government? Yeah. What
Yes,
was it?
both my parents worked for the federal government. They're both writers. I think they were actually frustrated artists who, not frustrated artists. They were artists who then had 3 kids and needed to get jobs. So my mother is an excellent pianist. My father, a beautiful singer. They dance wonderfully. They harmonize beautifully together. But they had 3 kids, so they had to work, and so they were writers for different parts of the government at different times. And that, that sort of anger and challenge that you're talking about had an outlet in music in Washington, D.C. that was particularly focused. It's a mid-sized city with areas that sort of countercultural areas that were small and concentrated. So you knew where to go to see the other people that were interested in the things that you were interested in, the music that you were interested in. So I know the venue where the Cramps played that show. I lived not far from there. I think I was 9 or 8 when that show happened. So no, I didn't see it, but I saw a lot of other amazing shows. And having had older sisters, one of which was only 16 months older than I am, who had just, that 16 months was like enough to get a musical edge and bring things home and bring me to shows and see bands that many of which went on to be extraordinarily famous. The vast majority went on to oblivion, but they imprinted in me an ethos of independence and of integrity that I think that I really credit the music scene in Washington, D.C. for.
It's interesting that the art that forms in the shadow of the government gives you that sense, like ties that into your DNA. Were you were playing in bands as a kid, I imagine. You were starting your own stuff to emulate what you saw those people a little bit older than you were doing?
Yeah, my first band was called Anathema, as one does. So yeah, I was going to see bands as often as I could. My parents, being musicians, were more open to me going to these venues that were, not in safe neighborhoods, but my sister and I were usually together, which somehow made them feel more comfortable about it. But I remember one time my parents dropped us off, and if you're not familiar what a hardcore matinee is, it's a matinee, obviously, with a bunch of hardcore bands playing, usually young bands. My parents dropped us off in what was literally block after block of demolished buildings. It was just block after block of rubble. And then there was this cinder block. Calling it a building was giving it too much credit. It was a cinder block room, and there were 4 bands playing. And I remember my parents dropping us off, and of course, asking them to drop us off a block away because that was embarrassing. And going to see these bands, and it was the same drummer for this first and second band. I was like, wow, that guy is amazing. He's playing just 2,
working.
sets.
Yeah.
And then there was a different band, and then that drummer came back, and I was like, man, he just played 3 out of 4 sets. It's 140 degrees in here, and that guy was Dave Grohl of Nirvana and Foo Fighters. So, that sort of stuff was just part of what one experienced, just being exposed to a lot of music at that time.
Do you keep playing in these bands does this go all the way through high school for you? Like going to see these types of shows, going to see this stuff? Is that like a path that you ever feel like you're on? You're going to be a music kid?
It always, there was no hope or intention of ever making $1. That just didn't register. And so as a result, I never used my name, and I always used a different name with every band that I was in. So I'm pretty much ungoogleable in relation to music because it just didn't matter. It was us having fun. It was us bonding. It was a creative process. And I think that the experience of being in a band really taught me a lot about the workplace. I remember a while ago, I was talking to the CEO of a very successful investment advisory firm. And he said that when he was hiring, he always looked for people who played team sports because they knew how to be a part of a team. They knew when to lead. They knew when to be defense, offense, all these things. And I feel the same about being in a band. You are doing something collectively, but you have your own part of it that you need to hold up. And sometimes that part is in the forefront. Most of the time you are playing in the ensemble. But you also have to get along with those people in a stinky small room that is the aforementioned 140 degrees. So there are added stressors to what is essentially a recreational activity, but as a young person, it feels vital. It feels like your life depends on it. This song coming out well.
Is there something about the recreational activity without the adult coach or without the thing? I mean, you're in a hiring role or you've been exposed to this in leadership roles in various places. Have you ever hired based on you had the band experience? You weren't the captain of the volleyball team or something?
I think I am probably biased towards musicians, which is, maybe I shouldn't say that out loud. Because we're going to have more.
It's okay. I am too. So you're in a safe space to admit we're taking on the jocks in our own way again.
Because there is discipline involved in learning an instrument that requires sitting alone and making mistakes and sticking to something until you get it. And in fact, I feel like my development as a musician, if I can call myself that, someone who loves to play music anyway, started with punk, as you mentioned. And that was really more about, it was more about intensity over accuracy, right? It was about communicating the intensity of what I was feeling. And then as I matured, I realized that actually I want to be really good at everything that I do. That I think this is something that some people are born with, some people mature into. But as a teenager, I was like, okay, I actually want to be really good at this. And I want to learn the skills required to play faster, more intricate music, which that sort of led me to thrash metal. It's more complicated. It's more difficult to play. If you flub a note or miss a stop, it's a lot more obvious. And then, you go on to broader genres of music from there, where the contempt prior to investigation, which is really important as a young musician, it feels like, where records were expensive, so you only had a few of them. You were creating your identity around these few records, so you had to have contempt for other kinds of music, or you weren't fully embracing what you were doing at that point. And one learns that contempt prior to investigation is a really lame way to go about one's life. And so you learn other experiences, and with finance as well, right? We all work in the system in which we are trained and we focus, but with every new process or new set of tools that we learn, our own process is improved. So breadth is something that I am always trying to expand.
It feels like the barriers, and I love that expression, the contempt prior to investigation. So the barriers of buying something, like committing to buying the $10 to $20 tape then CD, meant on a limited budget, the thing you were going to take home with you, like there was no going back. I like to think pre-streaming services and being able to sample anything, the closest we got to it was like Blockbuster growing up. But even then, you commit to the movie you bring home on Friday night. You're stuck with that damn thing. You're going to watch the crappy movie because it had a cool cover and curse it all the way through, but you're still going to watch it.
And you had to go there and get it.
Physically,
time invested in it.
You spend a movie's length work of time to go get the thing. You spend multiple albums worth of time if you're buying punk rock albums, going to the record store and going through the things. What do you think those barriers are special, but then the removal or the lowering of those barriers, like as your tastes refine, how do you think about that evolution?
I think of it as, first of all, it's just maturation, right?
Yeah.
It's maturation, and it's understanding that by putting up barriers around oneself, one is limiting their own development. And I think about now with Spotify and Apple Music and all those streaming services, and my own son, who's just turned 14, has really, really broad taste in music because it's just there.
Right.
And I mean, for him, it's free because I pay the $16 a month for our family, like it's nothing. It costs nothing, which is unfortunate for the musicians because they get nothing. But it allows people to have, just sort of unlimited experience of music, which is incredible. And, the unlimited exposure to information is potentially, it's problematic when one doesn't have a good media diet. But obviously the stakes are very low in music. If my son comes home and he's listening to something that I'm still holding on to not liking from childhood, then who cares? But if we get engaged and the algorithms pick up on a poor media diet and we start being exposed on a more consistent basis, which then increases that consistency to ideas or someone's idea of reality, that's very dangerous. And I don't know how we come out of that, honestly.
So there's a through line inside of this of you discovering thrash, of you discovering more intricate things, of the barriers coming down, the curiosities coming up. How on earth do you get from being obsessed with this to architecture? I feel the through line. I don't see the through line. I've been dying to ask you this.
Well, I grew up literally in the heart of Washington, D.C. So across the street from my parents' house was the Library of Congress. Across the street from that is the Capitol. We didn't have air conditioning as a kid. And so my older sisters and I would go down to the mall and just go through museums to stay cool in the summertime. We would go into the Capitol because there was no security back then and we were kids. We would roam the attic of the congressional buildings, going in storage lockers of Congress people because it was air conditioned and they were there. So the monumentality of architecture was within me from day one. And so an interest and an appreciation for the built environment has always just been a part of my life through no intention of my own, just by luck.
So what made you want to study it? Like, when did you say this is a path I want to formally learn more about?
As many people, so my parents, education was the most important thing to my parents. They're really, really, my father died a couple of years ago, but both of my parents are lifelong learners. My mother at 84 still takes classes just for fun and reads a couple newspapers a day. Like it's nonstop. And so growing up in that environment where education was paramount, I was allowed to go the liberal arts education route, just go explore things. And I really liked history. And so history became my focus. And then architectural history became a focus of mine. And then wanting to study that more deeply came from a tragedy. My eldest sister, was murdered when I was just out of college. And I went back to Washington, D.C. to be with my family. And I was young and I was angry and I was hurt and I had no sense of how to deal with that kind of tragedy. She was 7 years older than me and, in a sense, had been sort of a third parent to me. Both my parents worked. She was there after school. And this kind of devastation, especially through violence, was more than I could handle. And so I needed to get out of Washington, D.C. for a number of reasons, just so I didn't do anything rash, to get away from the trauma, to be in a new environment. And so I was on my way to Korea to teach English with a friend of mine who was already there. And she was like, "You're going to love it here. They love metal. They're going to put you in a band the second your plane lands." And I was like, "Great, sign me up. I'm going to stop in Paris and visit this woman I was dating at the time." I didn't leave Paris. So didn't make it to Korea, didn't become a Korean rock star, unfortunately. But I ended up in Paris and found a French school that would accept me with limited French language experience. And so I bumbled through architecture school there before coming back to the States.
How's your French these days?
Bad. The things that I remember are all swear words. Grammar, gone. Vocabulary, pathetic. The swearing stuck.
I mean, if you're going to learn one thing in any other, cultural norm, it should be to swear. The decision to stay in Paris, does that help you heal from this tragic loss?
Yes, my girlfriend then was wonderful and supportive and helpful, and I dove into the education there, and so I never mentioned my sister's death in pretty much any circumstance, but it refocused me in a way. After I sort of came out of the tragedy of it,
Yeah.
Which took a long time, it gave me an appreciation for the friends around me and the people around me in a way that I think I took them for granted. And it gave me a reason to learn to be a better friend, a better partner, a better employee, just to be better. Everything is temporary, and you better try hard while you're at it. And that includes friendships and relationships.
Where do you go after Paris? What takes you out of Paris? Why would you ever leave Paris?
It's a great question because I want to go back. Okay, this is embarrassing. You ready?
Please, that's what we're here for.
I was scouted as a model. And when someone says, "Hey, do you want to make a bunch of money putting on clothes and walking down a runway in really exotic places?" The answer is yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Yes, I do.
So, I find myself walking down a runway in a monastery in Italy in a pair of underpants with a bunch of other dudes who were not that bright. But it was exotic and it was different. And I try to be open to any new experience. I try to be the opposite of contempt prior to investigation. Hey, here's something weird. Yeah, I'll check that out. Hey, do you want to eat this really strange thing? Yes, I do. Do you want to put on this dumb suit and stand there for a while I take pictures? Yeah, sure. Do I get to go somewhere interesting? Yeah, okay. Sure. So that had a relatively short lifespan, though, because it really was, I found that I wasn't able to have the conversations that stimulated me in that environment. I would try and they would go nowhere. And so it was not as one may find surprising, it was not intellectually stimulating.
No, you don't say. Not saying that it can't be, but
that took me to California, where I was cast to be in a movie, and I had a couple months to get in shape, learn how to throw knives, walk on my hands. Like, there were a couple things that I needed to learn how to do in those couple months while the movie came together. And then what happens to most movies is they fall apart and nothing ever happens. So then I went back to New York to go to graduate school and got serious about life. And this is all, in my early mid-20s by the time this was. And graduate school was amazing. I met wonderful people in New York, and I always kind of knew I would end up in New York. I love the intensity of it. I love that it's kind of just a crucible of serendipity, and you're just constantly in proximity to people seeking greatness. Like, what an awesome experience.
Did New York represent anything as a kid to you? Did you go to New York as a kid? Did you experience it just in passing through? What did New York represent to a DC kid?
It was the big one. We were like a little city, but that was the big one. My eldest sister went to Columbia, and so I'd visited her. My uncle was a banker in New York and visited him. So I knew I had experienced New York, and I always sort of had that, like, all right, I'm going to end up there eventually. So it's okay that I fool around and go to Paris and California and stuff, because I'll end up
Become a handsome boy model, all these things.
I may never live that one down.
I hope you never do, but in the best possible way. And I'm tabling so many handsome boy modeling school references right now that it's uncomfortable, but we'll cover that outside of this recording. So you come to New York, you decide to kind of like I'm going to say get serious, but I don't mean get serious in any boring way. Like, you got serious about, you realize like this intellectual curiosity that you had, you're coming into your own and trying to do this thing. What's the first path you're on, either going through school and getting that advanced degree, or what, besides being in that location, did you have any other plan at all?
No, I didn't. I'm so envious of it. I think that I'm very envious of people who came out of high school, knew what they wanted to do, went to school for it, started in that field, and just excelled. I think that that's just remarkable.
Are you actually envious of those people? Genuinely, do you really feel like, outside of being an athlete or somebody who excels at something, or I don't know, Carl Sagan or something, and I don't even know if he could answer it that way. Do you really envy that?
I don't know if maybe envy is the wrong word. Maybe respect.
Okay.
I really respect people who have chosen a path and found the unlimited nature of their path. Because when I found finance, which I had contempt for as a young person, when I found it and I realized there is no way I will ever feel stagnant in this field. The 1/1 billionth of 1% of this part of the world that I understand is irrelevant tomorrow, and I have to learn that 1/1 billionth again. It's just, there's no end to what one can learn and directions one can go in the world of finance. Obviously, one has to make a choice and try to excel in the part that their small little part, my small little part, but one is then allowed to draw from all the other parts and learn from them, which to me felt like, all right, this is where I want to be. When I was in the design world, I felt like, okay, I get this. I see how this works. I see where the cap is on this. Maybe I'll get to design some cool house in the Alps or something like that, right? Like, that's sort of like you hit peak, where there is no limit. There is no limit to the location. There is no limit to one's success. There's no limit to what one can learn and the people one can encounter. And I find that thrilling.
Who lets you know how, and it might be who's plural, that the stagnation risk wasn't there? What opens your eyes to this isn't just I'm a teller in a bank or I'm an investment banker, which, most children don't even know what that is unless their parent. Who opens your mind to you don't have to be stagnant in what you otherwise see as a very constrained, limited, stagnant universe like finance?
Pre-WeWork, I had a desk in a big loft space with a bunch of other folks who were in sort of real New York real estate-y, financy realms. And these guys were really, really smart and super open, also into music, coincidentally. So that actually, that the fact that they were into music made me realize, like, oh, okay, so this is broader than I thought. You can be into music and finance at the same time, which in my young mind, I was like, well, no, those things are the opposite of each other. That's what it felt like. Finance and playing in a band are the opposite. So these guys had such incredible breadth of knowledge about finance, about real estate, about even crypto back then. Well, no, not quite. About the idea of tokenization, because this was in the early aughts, so not yet with crypto, but the ideas that I think led to crypto were brewing in these guys' minds. And so just sort of seeing them find different ways of expressing their interest in finance was really inspiring. And then this guy in 2008, maybe it was a couple years before that, this guy came in, took a desk. He was really nice. He was really laid back, obviously very smart. And he would come in from like 10 to 4 and wear flip-flops. It was very casual. And I spoke with him a few times about what he did. And he was an asset manager. And then when 2008 happened and the world of New York City real estate is exploding and there's just, everybody is just yelling on the phone all day long. That's just how people communicated and suing each other and all that. This guy was really relaxed. And I realized that what he was doing was running strategies that got out of the market in times like that. And so I wanted to know more. So we talked a lot and he said, oh, I need somebody to do this thing. I don't remember what it was. And I was like, I've got some capacity. I'll do that thing. And then I need somebody to do this other thing. Okay, I'll do that too. And so eventually I was working for him. And that guy is Phil Taves, who mentored me and has brought me along from a tiny boutique status. And I think there were 4 of us when I started to now just regular boutique status. And that working for an independent firm where we know the people that we work with, we know our clients, we know the advisors that we work with, that feels true to my upbringing. It feels true to my independent music training, where it feels like a small community. And obviously, Vanguard does things to help people, but they don't know the people they're helping. They don't even know the people they work with. And that small community environment really suits me.
Is it from talking to Phil? Is it from this era where you start to get into, how's psychology get into this? How do you get interested in the psychology of all this stuff?
I've always been interested in people, and it's hard for me to have this conversation with you because I want to ask you questions. And one of the things when I have a conversation or I meet up with someone and we part, I'm excited if there's a little pang of discomfort where I didn't get to ask them all these other questions I had, because people are fascinating. Yeah. Everyone is fascinating. Everyone. And one can sort of, make broad generalizations about, grew up in the burbs of generic city X, and how could that person possibly be interesting? And, or how can, maybe that person saying, how can someone from New York be interesting, right? It's just a bunch of jerks. Everyone is interesting. And I always want to know more about people. And I think it's almost a fun game to try and like tease out the interesting things in people. So there's that that's just sort of built into me. But with our strategies that outperformed during the dot-com crisis, outperformed during 2008 and 9. But in between those times, people were like, well, what do I need a risk management strategy for? The money leaves in 99. The money comes in 2003 after we've already done the thing that we do.
Right.
The money leaves in 2007 because people were like, I'm just going to put more in real estate. And then in 2010, the money comes flooding back in because everybody wants to buy what they wish they had bought. So in 2011, after a few of these cycles, Phil Taves and I start thinking, okay, we need to teach the advisor community that we work with about behavioral finance and then have them communicate that to their clients about when the right time is to buy these things that will actually help you and not be a return chaser, which is natural. It's natural to want to chase returns. It's natural to be afraid of the thing that's not doing well at that moment because it hurts. No one wants to be in pain. Everybody wants to assume that whatever is happening at the moment will continue to happen. So in 2010, later in 2009, 2010, up through 2013, really, people were still waiting for the other shoe to drop. And so we had advisors in 2013 coming to me saying, well, okay, I'm ready to get back in the market. Well, it's kind of late. You missed out a lot. So we started teaching these classes. And at that time, it was more definitional. In 2011, it wasn't the sort of constant topic of discussion that it is now. So we were defining what behavioral finance was to people and how they might use it in their practice. And people really, and these were like 5-hour workshops. There was a lot of information. People really liked them. They embraced the information, and we would check back in with them. And, Eben, that was really great. You and Phil did a great job. I'm so glad to hear that. What have you changed in your practice? Nothing. So then we thought, okay, we need to create tools for these people so that they have something physical or digital that they can use with their clients to help them see when they want to make a change in a portfolio. Let's go through steps to see why they want to make that change. And what are the reasons behind it? And are they valid reasons? We gave them these tools. Oh, this is fantastic. Some people used them. Most people didn't. They liked them. They wanted to use them, but people are generally reluctant to change, and they're reluctant to spend an extra 5 minutes on something that might help them because they're used to doing things the way they've done them. So then we thought, okay, we need to hold them accountable. So we started a coaching program, and that worked. We met with advisors on a regular basis and held them accountable to creating change in their practice, in their communication, and in their portfolios. And the key there is the portfolios, because still today, behavioral finance experts, which I have a ton of respect for, and there's so many great people out there, from our friend Daniel Crosby, Brian Portnoy, Morgan Housel, all these guys are doing just incredible work. But most of them steer away, way shy of making any portfolio recommendations. However, half of what is inspiring the emotional reaction and potential for mistakes is what's going on in the portfolio. So if you don't fix what's going on in the portfolio and bring the portfolio within a range of tolerable emotional volatility, which usually coincides with economic volatility, then people will not be able to stick with it, or they'll be grinding their teeth the whole time. And the moment things get too hard, that person you thought was a delegator is out the door. The problem with the coaching program, it was totally unscalable. It was fascinating. I learned massive amounts from these wonderful advisors who used us as a part of their practice, and as a sounding board, and would call, hey, I just had this meeting with this client. I don't know what to do. We would walk through it. And I did a program at Kansas State in financial therapy, which most people laugh when they hear that. And I get that.
But you did this, how long ago did you do this?
2018, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, you're ahead of the curve. There's a lot of people going through these programs now for a lot more reasons. The whole advisor as life coach thing the movement is afoot, my friend. You were early.
So
you did that.
It was fascinating. It was fascinating.
Yeah.
And I take a lot from that. And we developed more tools based on what I learned there. And I feel like now we have so much more to offer the advisors that we work with than just product, right? It's just the word product sounds gross.
When you think about working with advisors versus, there's always that look through, because it's working with somebody else's client, turtles all the way down. When you think about working with the advisors to help them versus working directly with clients versus what scales and doesn't scale about these kind of like latticed communities almost. How do you think about those layers and just the role you want to have in impacting or imparting change across those layers?
I think that we all have to live the thing that we are speaking about. So it has to be something that we're doing as part of our everyday practice as well. And in this industry, we all seek amplifiers. We all seek people that can amplify our message. And, distribution, right? The whole part of our business of distribution, I learned through being in punk bands in high school. So you're in a punk band in high school. You want people to come to your show. What do you need to do? You need to create a flyer that is graphically appealing, that gets people's attention, that lets them know what they're in for in some way or another graphically, right? Because you can't say punk show, right? Can't do that. So somehow you're communicating your message by going and cutting and pasting and going to Kinko's, now FedEx. And you're putting that in places where it will be noticed. And you're talking to people who will invite other people along. You're amplifying your message through those people. And then you're working with the venue, the club in this case, to make sure that you are easy to work with, you're timely, you're respectful, you do what you say you're going to do, and you bring them profitability in some way or another. Sometimes that, in the case of finance, is through economic gain. Sometimes it's through education, which we do a lot of, CE credit education. And then you have to deliver the product, and it has to be what you said it was going to be for all of those people that you have brought along to that place. There is nothing different about that than messaging around education or the strategies, mutual funds and ETFs that we bring to the world.
The flyers are less fun. There's
The
more
flyers
compliance.
are less fun. You're right.
Yeah.
Compliance was pretty easy in high school.
You mean you didn't cite the copyright on everything you clipped out to make a flyer?
I did, definitely.
You did? Okay. I don't know what the look back period is on that. When I really love the way that you put that in terms of amplifiers and thinking of it there. And I think part of what I really loved about that is, so how do you think about the reach of that message? So especially like with education, it can reach further. You can have an institution that reaches way, way further, way, way broader. But how do you think about the one-to-one or the, one to not too many? Because you ran into these scaling limitations before. So like, how do you think about how far it has to go versus how far you want it to go?
Because we're a small firm, we manage $1 billion. We are working with advisors who are, they're working with people that are not necessarily generationally wealthy. Some are, but preserving and growing their assets matters in a profound way to people who don't have tens of millions of dollars. So being able to touch those few lives through the advisors that we work with, through the advisor community that we work with, feels important and deeply satisfying. Now, being able to provide someone like a 0 basis points ETF of the S&P is really important. It's not what we do. That is, you get what you pay for there, right? It's just exposure to the thing, right? You don't get much else with that. You don't get someone who knows you and who knows, a lot of the advisors that we work with, they're friends. I know their families. They checked up on us during COVID in New York City. These are real important relationships to me. And that has a personally satisfying element to it, as well as meeting their clients, doing client events. I love doing client events because you get to actually meet the people that you are having the sort of flow through impact on and see them for the work that they have done in their lives to get to this place where they have the assets to manage. And that's beautiful.
Do you feel like your family, spouse, kids, are they aware? How aware are they of like what you do, of the rest of this?
I try and talk to them about the interesting parts of what I do. My sister has no idea what I do. She says that she refers to me as a financial panther. That's my job to her.
Okay.
Financial panther. I don't know what that means.
I don't know what that means either. Can we? Yeah, we're not going to come right now. But yeah, that's fantastic.
Funny. My sister's funny. She is a brilliant math teacher. She came up with a new way of teaching geometry. And she's so smart, total hard ass, but brilliant. And also really talking about the financial therapy thing, massively money avoidant.
Okay.
She's been a teacher for, 27 years, something like that. And I've been bugging her to look at her 403B for years. Please just let me make sure that it's not in something dumb,
Right.
That's not earning anything. I bugged her for years and years and years. Finally, in 2022, now I'm her dumb younger brother, right? Like I'm just a stupid younger brother. I don't know. Forever. It's 16 months, by the way. Right? Mentioned that before. Finally, in 2022, market's down. She's like, fine, you can look at my statement. She has $1.5 million in her 403B. And mind you, this is the bottom of the market in 2022. Yeah. I look through how it's allocated. Fine. Would I make a couple changes? Yeah, but it's not worth it. It's fine. So her money avoidance actually worked in her favor because, and only because, when she was starting out as a teacher, someone got in her ear and said, max out your allocation every year. She wouldn't know to do that. She probably wouldn't have read, she definitely wouldn't have read the documents to know that that's a good idea. Someone got in her ear and changed her life 27 years ago. And that person's moment with my sister, that person probably had that moment with a lot of people and changed a lot of people's lives. And so I hope to be someone who changes a lot of people's lives who don't know me, who have felt the impact of the education that we do, of the risk management strategies that we provide, of what I try to give of my person to them.
What about your own kids? Like, do you feel any of this trickling down to them? And I don't mean like money. I don't care if they know the names of 18 behavioral biases or, are already using therapy apps on their phone or something. What are you trying to pass to them? What wisdom are you trying to share on this stuff, if any?
So my parents taught me how to save. They didn't know about investing. They were low-level bureaucrats. They didn't have money to invest, but they knew the importance of saving. And so every year when I got my $3 from my birthday or whatever, we would go to the bank and I would deposit it. And I have had a job since I was 12, consistently since I was 12. And so I made and saved a lot of money by the time I was going to college. And so with my son, I'm trying to teach him the importance of saving and investing. So, you want to have some money on hand if you want to buy a model airplane or some candy or whatever, but it's also important. I'd rather not buy the candy, but
That's okay.
Kids need candy or want candy. But showing him how we can invest and how we are investing it for him, and bringing up a spreadsheet and showing him how compounding interest works, and saying like, all right, when you're 75, if we assume inflation, and then we talk about inflation, if we assume an average return and we talk about how the average is never the return, right? It's around that. And so giving him those kinds of lessons early on that I didn't have, but I had the kernel of, so that he knows when he starts that first job, he's already gotten someone in his ear, and that's me, that got into my sister's ear back then.
Has he had the first job yet? Or is it just around the house stuff? Understanding that given his age, like COVID and other things have made it hard to be a kid these last few years.
Yeah, he turned 13 on Saturday, so he has not had a job outside of working for me, chopping wood and dragging things around in the woods.
Mowing the lawn if you can get it. Mowing the lawn.
Yeah, mowing the lawn, sweeping the driveway, just stuff. But I think he's got the bug. In New York, I think you have to be 14 in order to get working papers. I didn't know what working papers were.
No.
When I was 12, I just got a job at the local hardware store, and then I worked in the ice cream shop after that, which was maybe the best job I've ever had. And on from there.
See, kids want candy point mentioned previously.
Exactly.
All right. Before I take us back on this journey through the notes, I got to ask this too. So you're sharing music with your kids. You're still listening to some stuff on your own. Give me like the last week. Give me some highlights. What is Eben Burr going to work every day and playing? I don't care how disparate or obscure this may be. I'm genuinely curious.
Okay, let's just pull up Spotify here.
Yeah, what's inspiring you lately? Because you didn't give up this interest in music, right? It didn't just go die.
No, yeah, that's still there. So I recently listened to the song "I Feel Love" by Donna Summer.
Excellent.
Bill Orcutt, 4 Guitars Live, which is, as it says, 4 guitars live, but all 4 guitars are missing the A and D strings. Interesting. Some weird stuff. Porridge Radio, Lankum, Black Cobra. These, Lankum is like a super depressing Irish folk band, I guess. But then Tribe Called Quest, Royal Blood, Obituary, Nas, Nails. Oh, they're really good. Mets, Mastodon, Marnie Stern, Lungfish, Leftover Crack, Idols, Ice Age, etc.
etc. Well, so this is an eclectic risk. Extra shout out to Leftover Crack. I have another band member from a former Leftover Crack band coming on a different podcast in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
I'll make sure I message you about that one. This is a super eclectic risk list here. Risk maybe unintentionally put in there. The maybe intentionally. The why still consume? Like, is this just curiosity? Is this still the stagnation, the limits? Is this still just pulling at you? Is this your version of your mom still reading 5 newspapers?
You listening to different music all the time?
Yeah, just being. I mean, I heard Tribe, Mastodon, Leftover Crack, Donna Summer, and other things in the last 30 seconds there.
I mean, I think it's just it's so awesome to have all of this music available that why not indulge in, in the moments of life when one is doing mundane tasks. I'm a favor of being in the moment and doing a mundane task and just doing the mundane task. But sometimes you want a soundtrack to the mundane task. And it's fun to cook, listen to music. I mean, music just has to be a part of my life all the time. And it thrills me. And it thrills me to hear something old that I've never heard before or something new that, is exciting.
I want to take us through some notes. I want to put the extra highlighter on that last thing though, like that new and exciting piece, because I think this is something that now taking in all that is Eben Burr in the last, hour here, and just thinking about that desire for something to not be stagnant and understand like the limits you can take it is a really interesting through line to just understanding how you approach, I guess, life, like forget finance and career, just life. Please interrupt as we go. Any other stories or points you are welcome to add. We started off talking about the 60s, the whole, I think people misunderstand this, just the non-industrial, all government employee reality of growing up there, of the way that changes the way you see art, the way that you change just anger and nuance, and you take all this stuff in. You learn something different in the shadow of this stuff. This ethos of independence and integrity is what you said. I love that art exists in the shadows in this place, and without the industrial output, it's not. I grew up in an old coal mining town, effectively. Like, that was a different type of angst and a lack of nuance in so many ways. You grew up with these politically informed parents and whatever else working on this thing, going, no, I really want to make this thing better. But it's hard at scale.
It's hard at scale. And, to put an even finer point on it, like, DC was a wreck. It was the murder capital. Yet you've got one of the most brilliant collections of art and design happening blocks away from my parents' house. So having exposure to the fine arts of the world and instead choosing the sort of lower arts, I forgot what your question was. I'm sorry.
No, it's just, I'm really in awe of that juxtaposition. And I think even just hearing you talk about it right now, any Trouble Funk shows? Did we do much go-go in your younger days?
For sure.
I think that crossover too, because in the post-60s thing that unfolds in DC, the art that gets created around all of this stuff that's going on, it's so fascinating how many intense small communities form through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, like right on up. Like that's an incredible thing to be a part of. You talked about the discipline of the arts in your own life. I love the punk to explain as intensity over accuracy, but then you realize at some point you want to get good at something. And this appreciation that I feel like is imbued in you from being in DC, of just the appreciation of a well-constructed environment, the appreciation that goes from no, not just the intensity. Like I don't want to say you matured into thrash metal, but like you matured into stuff that had a different sense of structure around it, that wasn't just lashing out in violence at this thing. I want to applaud the bravery, the courage of sharing the story about your sister. and how that kind of evolved you yet again, because that's a whole other response to violence in your personal life that I just think is really beautiful, on the way that it refocuses you around family, around community, around friends, around the architecture of building things better. Like, not just practicing the guitar to get good at the run and do the elaborate thing, like practicing this thing to say, I want to be the opposite of contempt prior to investment. I want to make something that is yeah. Sorry, say that again.
Contempt prior to investigation.
Contempt prior to investigation. Oh, geez. Thank you. Hey, yeah, make the investment. Have the contempt prior to the investigation of the thing that keeps you as the barrier to entry, because that's the way that you avoid this stagnation risk. That limitlessness of avoiding the stagnation risk is what puts you in that room back in New York City when you meet Phil Taves, and figuring out how to be true to you, how to be true to, it's actually limitless. You can actually build a life in a community. The community is the limitless thing. Like the walls, the thing that's in the cinder block punk rock hall, like that's the thing that's limiting. The community that you take, being a Dave Grohl and being in 3 different bands and doing everything, like that part is the limitless thing. You can teach the relationships to be limitless. And that shows up in the work you do today. I loved your explanation of layers and amplifiers. I love this understanding of like, oh, you don't even have to be like, yeah, you can go be Vanguard. You can go be Dave Grohl and Nirvana and then the streaming catalog. But like, even Dave Grohl is getting back on stages. Even Dave Grohl is getting up after loss and doing a thing again. You can be the face of that thing, or you can be, as you put it, be the anonymous life changer. The story you told about the associate of your sister who basically said, yeah, you're financially avoidant, you're going to ignore this thing. That's fine. Just make sure you max this thing out on the way in. And how many times in life is it those little rules of thumb, those little desires to do something that end up drawing us all the way through? Because that's what compounds, right? Like community is the thing that compounds. Community in the relationships over and over again, the little nuggets somebody puts in our head that aren't destructive nuggets, the things that aren't violence, like those are the things that compound. And you make me think of this thing that's just on my mind a lot lately. Like we obsess over scaling, where growth is the whole thing about scaling. I want to obsess over scales. I want to obsess over things that like have weight, that actually have meaning, that I put down. I don't need it to be the biggest thing in the world. I want it to have some friggin' weight.
Yeah. You want it to be important. Have some gravity. You know, what I think about, as you were saying, the sort of expansiveness of relationships and all that those can bring in work and personally. Having structure also is massively important. So, you know, back to songwriting, right? You're building a song, it has a structure, it has an arc to it. Making sure that end users, investors understand the arc of their plan and the challenges that will come along with it and the structure that's in place to get them through that. So one of the things that really appealed to me about Phil and his process when I first met him and still today is the rigorous discipline that the investment committee, and which was just Phil back then, has in place to create opportunities and also safety for the investor in the end. And I think of myself as a disciplined person. Every morning I either meditate or exercise, or sometimes both if I've got time. I try and keep everything in order in my life and in business. And without structure, the breadth of experience, that amplification of messaging is impossible. Because to just sort of go out there loosey-goosey, it's not going to work. You need to have discipline. One needs to have plan. One needs to have a structure that is built out and thoughtful so that one is planning for all different kinds of contingencies. And I think we've done these studies in the past where we ask advisors and investors the same questions. And then we ask the advisors how they think the investors would answer those questions. And no surprise, way off. But what we found was most people, just thinking about their portfolio causes them stress. Just say, hey, just think about your portfolio. And they literally are stressed out. And what brings that stress down is communication from the advisor, surprisingly, about how bad things can get. Let's talk about how bad things can get and the plan we have in place for all of those, as many contingencies as we can conceive of. Because most of the time in our lives, we deal in the one circle that we've experienced. We can plan for the things that we've experienced. So a lot of people entered the finance field after 2009. So they haven't experienced a prolonged down period in the market. They've had 2020, 2022, sort of quick blips compared to .com and the financial crisis. So that's their experience realm that they can plan for. Then the next rung out of that concentric rings is what they've read about or heard about, the stories. You know, the crash of 1987, maybe it's the .com bust for someone who's younger in the field, or the depression, right? There's nobody around that lived through the depression anymore. So then there are the stories. That's the story circle, which you can, have an idea of how to plan for. And then there's infinity. The last circle is infinity. And it's very hard to plan for infinity, but one needs to try and think of the person who will be impacted by not having the plans in place for all of the challenges that will arise, as many as can be conceived of, because that person is relying on you to maintain their assets to get them through to the end. The growth is, in my opinion, secondary because aforementioned Vanguard, you can buy it for free and it will just happen. The planning around risk, building risk-based portfolios rather than return-based portfolios is actually what most people want. You will come across people who are like, I want to make the most money possible. I don't care about dropping markets. And then markets drop and they get upset. But most people are a little more reasonable and they want the portfolio that they can get the highest return that they are the most comfortable with for the longest period of time.
I love the mix of all the things that you can stitch together on this. I love the depth of perspective. Eben Burr, tell the people where they can find you, learn more about what you and the work you do at Taves.
Well, you can email me at eben@tavescorp.com. You can call me at 646-431-5200. You can watch the little videos that I do on LinkedIn or YouTube or on the Taves website. I am always happy to talk to someone new. Matt, thanks so much for having me. It's been really fun.
Eben Burr, you are truly an intentional investor. Thanks so much for doing this today. It was an absolute ball.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you're watching The Intentional Investor so more people can find our show. You can follow Matt directly at cultishcreative.com or at cultishcreative on Twitter. For more great content at the intersection of investing and life, check out epsilontheory.com or at epsilontheory on Twitter.